Greetings to all of you. From the bottom of my heart, I thank you for choosing to follow the stories here on Touching Tales. If you have already subscribed and journeyed with us, please leave a few words for us in the comments. And if not, please support us by subscribing to the channel. Let us listen to the emotional stories of life together. Today's story tells of a journey of a man who became an unexpected single father. On a fateful, snowy night, he found Maya, a little girl who survived a crash that claimed her parents. Daniel sacrificed everything. He chose to become the father of a helpless child that the world told him to abandon. What will happen now that the little girl he once saved is a grown woman? Can a love that transcends color truly break the prejudice of a town filled with doubt? Please stay with us until the very end of this story. Chapter 1. The Fateful Encounter in the Blizzard. The wind howled like a wounded beast against the cedar siding of the old farmhouse. It was a sound Daniel knew well. It was the sound of a Georgia winter that had forgotten its manners. Outside, the world was disappearing. White curtains of snow draped over the hills of rural Georgia. It was a record breaker, the kind of storm that turned familiar landmarks into ghosts. Daniel sat by the hearth. The fire popped and crackled. He rubbed his lower back. The dull ache in his spine was a constant companion. It was a souvenir from a collapsed roof 10 years ago. He was a firefighter once, a man who ran into the places everyone else ran away from. Now, he was a man who moved with a heavy limp, a man who measured his days by the woodpile and the kettle. The power had flickered and died an hour ago. The house was settling into a deep, heavy silence. Then, he heard it. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the cracking of a frozen branch. It was a metallic thud, followed by a long, grinding screech. Daniel stood up. His spine protested with a sharp needle of pain. He ignored it. The instinct was still there, the old reflex of a savior. He pulled on his heavy wool coat. He grabbed the industrial flashlight from the mantel. When he opened the front door, the cold slapped him across the face. The snow was already knee-deep. He stepped out into the white void. Every step was a battle. His boots sank deep. His bad leg dragged. He moved toward the edge of his property, toward the narrow road that cut through the pines. He saw the glow of a single taillight. A car had skidded off the embankment. It was wedged nose first into a thicket of oaks. The engine was dead. The headlights were smashed. Daniel reached the vehicle. His breath came in ragged gasps. He wiped the frost from the driver's side window. Empty. The passenger side was the same. The airbags had deployed like giant, deflated lungs. There was blood on the dashboard, but no people. Panic started to rise in his chest. Where were they in this cold? A human wouldn't last 30 minutes. He circled to the back of the car. He pulled the rear door open. A gust of snow swirled into the back seat. There, buckled into a faded plastic car seat, was a tiny girl. She looked to be no more than 2 years old. Her skin was a deep, beautiful ebony. It stood out sharply against the pale pink of her fleece jacket. She wasn't crying. She was beyond crying. Her lips were a terrifying shade of blue. Her eyes were half closed, dazed. She was shivering so hard the plastic seat was rattling. Daniel reached in. His fingers were stiff with cold. He struggled with the buckle. "I've got you," he whispered. "I've got you, little one." The latch clicked. He pulled her out. She weighed almost nothing. She was a bird, a tiny, frozen bird. He looked around the car once more. He shouted into the storm. No one answered, only the roar of the pines. He tucked the girl inside his heavy coat. He pressed her small body directly against his chest. He felt her icy hands through his shirt. He had to get back. The return trip was a nightmare. The wind was at his back now, pushing him, threatening to topple him into the drifts. His spinal injury flared. Each step felt like a hot iron was being pressed into his hip. He stumbled. He went down on one knee. He didn't let go of the girl. He shielded her with his arms. "Stay with me," he grunted. "Don't you go to sleep." He forced himself up. He dragged his leg. He followed the faint, dying orange glow of the embers in his fireplace through the window. He made it inside. He slammed the door. He didn't stop to take off his boots. He sat right on the rug by the hearth. He wrapped a thick wool blanket around both of them. He fed the fire more wood. The flames roared to life. For hours. Daniel simply held her. He shared his heat. He whispered old nursery rhymes he hadn't thought of in decades. Slowly. The blue faded from her lips. Her eyes opened fully. They were dark, deep, filled with a sudden, piercing intelligence. She looked at Daniel. She didn't scream. She didn't pull away. She reached up one small, thawing hand. She touched the gray stubble on his chin. In that dark, frozen house. Something changed. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was full. Morning brought the authorities. The storm had broken. The world was blindingly white. The news was grim. The police found the parents a half-mile down the road. They had tried to walk for help. They hadn't made it. They were young, travelers from far away. No papers, no local family. Just a name on a tattered suitcase in the trunk. "She's alone, Daniel," the sheriff said. He looked at the little girl sitting on Daniel's kitchen table. She was eating a bowl of oatmeal. "She doesn't have anyone." Daniel looked at his quiet house. He looked at his medicine bottles on the counter. He looked at his cane leaning against the wall. He was a broken man in a lonely town. Then he looked at her. She was watching him. She was waiting. "She has me," Daniel said. His brother called that evening. The words were sharp. "You're crazy, Dan. You can't even walk right. And a black child in this town, people are going to talk. Our own family won't understand." Daniel listened. He felt the familiar sting of his brother's judgment. "Let them talk," Daniel replied. He hung up the phone. A week later. Daniel sat in a sterile office in the city. The paperwork was piled high. His pension was small. His back was ruined. The social worker looked at him with pity. "It won't be easy, Mr. Sullivan. You're taking on a lot, without a car, without a wife. It's a long road." Daniel picked up the pen. He looked at the little girl playing with a wooden block on the floor. "I've spent my life saving strangers from fires," Daniel said. His voice was steady. "I think I can save one little girl from the cold." He signed his name, Daniel Sullivan. He looked at her. "Maya," he whispered. "Your name is Maya." He stood up. He felt the familiar pull in his spine. He knew the pain would never truly go away. He knew the neighbors would stare. He knew his brother would stop calling. He didn't care. He walked over to her. He bent down. It was a slow, laborious movement. He picked her up. He tucked her into the crook of his arm. Maya rested her head on his shoulder. Daniel walked out of the office. He limped through the hallway. He stepped out into the crisp winter air. He didn't have a car. He didn't have a plan. But as he held her, he felt a strength he hadn't known in years. He was no longer just a retired man waiting for the end. He was a father, and he would carry her as far as he had to go. Chapter 2. Cracks in the family foundation. The gossip in a small town moves faster than the autumn wind. By the time the first frost settled on the red Georgia clay, everyone knew. They knew about the retired firefighter with the bad back. They knew about the little girl from the wreck, and they had opinions. Daniel stood on his front porch. He watched a car slow down as it passed his gate. The driver didn't wave. They just stared. It was a cold, hollow kind of looking. Inside. Maya was humming a wordless tune. She was stacking wooden spoons on the kitchen floor. To Daniel, that sound was peace. To the rest of the town, it was a problem. The first real crack appeared on a Tuesday. His brother, Robert, pulled up in his polished silver truck. He didn't come inside. He didn't ask to see the child. He stood in the driveway with his arms crossed over his chest. "You have to fix this, Dan," Robert said. His voice was like gravel. Daniel leaned against the porch railing. His spine felt like it was being squeezed by pliers. "Fix what, Rob? There's nothing broken here." "The hell there isn't." Robert stepped closer. "You're a Sullivan. We've lived in this county for 4 generations. People are talking. They're saying you've lost your mind." Daniel looked at his brother. This was the man he had grown up with, the man he had hunted with, the man who was supposed to be his blood. "She has no one," Daniel said softly. "She has the state," Robert shouted. "Send her to an orphanage. Give her to people of her own kind. If you keep her, you're dead to this family. I mean it. No more Sunday dinners. No more help with the harvest. You'll be on your own." Daniel didn't blink. He felt a coldness settling in his bones that had nothing to do with the weather. "Then I guess I'm on my own," Daniel said. Robert didn't say goodbye. He spat on the ground. He got in his truck and drove away. The dust hung in the air long after he was gone. The isolation began in earnest after that. The grocery store felt different. When Daniel walked down the aisles with Maya in the seat of the cart, people suddenly found something very interesting to look at on the bottom shelf. His old friend, Silas, the mechanic who used to stop by for coffee, stopped calling. The mailbox was empty of invitations. Then came Thanksgiving. Usually. The farmhouse would be steaming with the scent of turkey and sage. The house would be loud with the laughter of cousins. This year, the house was silent. Daniel had prepared a small meal, just for the two of them. He sat at the long oak table. Maya sat in a high chair he had built himself. He looked at the empty chairs. He thought about the warmth of past years. For a moment, the weight of it almost broke him. He felt a small, warm hand reach out. Maya had pushed a piece of bread toward him. "Dada," she whispered. The knot in Daniel's throat tightened. He realized then that he wasn't losing a family. He was protecting one. But the world wasn't done testing him. 2 days later, Daniel tried to start his truck. The engine gave a sickening, metallic groan, then a bang, then silence. Daniel climbed out. He popped the hood. Smoke curled up into the gray sky. He knew that smell. The engine was seized. The head gasket was blown. It was a total loss. He went inside and sat at his small desk. He pulled out his bank book. He had a few $100s saved. It was meant for emergencies. A used engine would cost every penny. He looked at the counter. Maya's special formula was running low. She needed warm clothes for the winter. She needed a checkup at the clinic in town. Daniel looked at the keys to the truck. Then he looked at the child sleeping on the sofa. There was no choice. Not really. He pushed the truck keys into the back of a drawer. "We're walking, Maya," he said to the quiet room. The next morning, Daniel took an old hiking frame. He modified it. He used thick straps and a padded seat. He tested it with bags of flour first. His back screamed. The pain was sharp. A white-hot flash that blurred his vision. He took a breath. He waited for the world to stop spinning. He put Maya into the seat. "Ready for an adventure?" Maya giggled. She pulled on his ears. The town was 4 miles away. 4 miles of steep hills and uneven gravel. Daniel stepped out onto the road. Step, drag, step, drag. His limp was heavy. The weight of the child pressed down on his injured vertebrae. Each footfall sent a shock of pain up his neck. He passed the Miller farm. Old Man Miller was out by the fence. He watched Daniel walk by. He didn't offer a ride. He didn't even nod. The sun beat down. Then the clouds moved in. A cold drizzle began to fall. Daniel didn't stop. He couldn't afford to stop. He reached the town square. His shirt was soaked with sweat and rain. His face was pale with exhaustion. He walked into the pharmacy. The bell on the door rang. The townspeople looked up. They saw the retired hero, the man they used to respect. He was disheveled. He was limping. He was carrying a black child on his back like a pack mule. The whispers started. "Look at him. Shameful. Lost his dignity." Daniel didn't look at them. He walked straight to the counter. "I need to pick up the milk and the vitamins," he said. His voice was cracked but firm. On the walk back, the wind picked up. Maya started to cry. She was cold. She was tired of the bouncing. Daniel stopped under a large oak tree. He took her out of the pack. He sat on a stump. He pulled her close to his chest. He shielded her with his body. "I know," he whispered. "I know it hurts. I'm sorry." He looked down the long, empty road. He looked at the closed doors of the houses nearby. He was 60 years old. He was broken. He was poor. He felt a wave of pure, unadulterated fear. What if he couldn't do it? What if his body gave out before she grew up? Maya looked up at him. She reached out. She wiped a stray drop of rain from his cheek. She smiled. It wasn't just a baby's smile. To Daniel, it was a light. It was a sign. He realized that the world could take away his truck. It could take away his brother's respect. It could take away the help of his neighbors. But it couldn't take away the fact that he was the only thing this girl had. And she was the only thing that made him feel alive. Daniel stood up. His back let out a sickening pop. He didn't wince. He strapped her back in. He adjusted the weight. "We're almost home, little one." He started walking again. Step, drag, step, drag. The shadows grew long across the Georgia hills. The cracks in the foundation were deep. The house of his old life was falling apart. But as Daniel walked into the darkness, he realized he was building something new, something stronger than blood. Something that didn't need a car to move forward. He was her father. And as long as he had breath in his lungs, he would be her bridge over every cold river the world put in their way. The lights of the farmhouse appeared in the distance. They were alone. But for the first time, Daniel didn't feel lonely. Chapter 3. Legs instead of wheels. The workshop in the back of the barn was freezing. Daniel sat on a low stool. His breath came out in white plumes. On the workbench before him lay strips of heavy leather, thick canvas, steel buckles, and pieces of foam he had scavenged from an old mattress. He wasn't building furniture today. He was building a bridge. His back was a map of fire. The nerves in his lower spine felt like frayed wires sparking in the dark. But he ignored the heat in his bones. He focused on the needle. He stitched the leather with a thick, waxed thread. He reinforced the shoulder straps until they were wide enough to distribute weight. He added a chest buckle, a waist belt. He was creating a throne for a queen. Maya stood by his knee. She was watching him with wide, curious eyes. She touched a shiny brass buckle. "For me?" she asked. Daniel smiled. He winced as he shifted his weight. "For us, Maya. This is how we're going to see the world." He tried it on. He felt the pull on his shoulders. He felt the familiar, grinding ache in his hip. He didn't care. He strapped Maya into the seat. She fit perfectly. She was high up, safe. Her small hands could rest right on the top of his head. "Now," Daniel whispered, "we walk." Every morning, before the sun had even cleared the pines. The ritual began. The dirt road was a long, winding ribbon of red clay and gravel. It stretched 2 miles from their front gate to the main highway. Daniel stepped out into the morning mist. Step, drag. Step, drag. The rhythm was slow, consistent, like a heartbeat. The weight of the child was a physical burden, but to Daniel, it was also an anchor. It kept him from drifting away into the bitterness of his isolation. They reached the highway just as the old yellow bus groaned to a stop. This was the only way into town, when the doors folded open. The silence inside the bus was deafening. Daniel climbed the steps. He held the handrail with a white-knuckled grip. His bad leg trembled. He walked down the aisle, a tall, graying white man with a heavy limp, carrying a beautiful black toddler on his back. He saw the glances. Some were filled with confusion, others with a sharp, cold judgment. "Is that a nanny?" a woman whispered in the third row. "No," a man replied. His voice was loud enough to carry. "That's the Sullivan man. He's lost his mind and his truck." Daniel didn't turn his head. He didn't offer a defense. He looked at Maya in the reflection of the window. She was watching a bird outside. She was safe. She was loved. That was the only truth that mattered. The seasons blurred, but the walks remained. There were days when the Georgia sun was a hammer. It beat down on Daniel's neck. It soaked his shirt in sweat. On those days, he told her stories about the forest. He taught her the names of the trees: oak, pine, hickory. He told her about the bravery it takes for a seed to push through the hard earth. "You're like that seed, Maya," he would say. His voice was thick with effort. "The ground might be hard, but you just keep reaching for the light." Then came the days of the rain. One afternoon, halfway home from the clinic, the sky turned a bruised purple. The clouds opened up. It wasn't a drizzle. It was a deluge. The wind whipped the red clay into a slippery soup. Daniel's boots slid. His bad leg gave way. He went down hard on one knee. Maya gasped. She began to cry. The cold water was stinging her face. Daniel didn't panic. He couldn't afford to. He struggled out of his heavy denim coat. His joints screamed at the movement. He was shivering. His skin turned a pale, ghostly blue. He took the coat and draped it over the harness. He tucked it in around Maya. He created a dry, dark tent for her. "I've got you," he shouted over the roar of the rain. "You're okay. Just hold on to me." He was standing in his thin undershirt. The rain felt like needles. His muscles began to cramp. He forced himself up. He walked. He didn't feel his feet anymore. He only felt the warmth of Maya's breath against the back of his neck. By the time they reached the farmhouse, Daniel was shaking so hard he could barely turn the key. Inside. He didn't stop to dry himself. He stripped the wet clothes off Maya. He wrapped her in a warm towel. He put her in front of the fire. Only then did he collapse into his chair. His body was broken, but his spirit was soaring. Years began to pile up. Maya wasn't a toddler anymore. She was a young girl with long braids and a fierce, kind heart. The harness grew larger. Daniel's limp grew heavier. The townspeople never truly stopped staring. They never truly stopped talking. But a strange thing happened. The sanctuary of Daniel's arms had become Maya's entire world. She didn't feel poor. She didn't feel neglected. She didn't know that other children didn't get to hear the heartbeat of their father every time they went to the store. She didn't know that other fathers didn't sacrifice their spines just to show their daughters the sunset. To her, Daniel wasn't a limping man. He was a giant. He was the mountain that stood between her and the storm. One evening, as they sat on the porch, Maya looked at the old harness hanging on the wall. "Does it hurt, Dad?" she asked. Carrying me, Daniel looked at his hands. They were scarred and worn. He looked at his daughter. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Maya," he said. His voice was soft, like the wind in the pines. "The only thing that ever hurt was the thought of you being alone." He reached out and took her hand. "You aren't a weight," he whispered. "You are my wings." In that moment, the fence around the property didn't feel like a cage. The silence of the neighbors didn't feel like a punishment. They were a world of two, an impenetrable fortress of leather, canvas, and a love that refused to break. The sun dipped below the horizon. Daniel felt the ache in his back, but as Maya leaned her head against his shoulder, he knew. He would do it all again. He would walk 1,000 miles, on 1,000 broken legs, just to hear her call him father. Chapter 4. Crisis and Coming of Age. The mirror in the hallway did not lie. Maya stood before it. She was no longer the little girl who fit into a leather harness. She was tall. Her shoulders were strong. Her eyes held the depth of someone who had watched the seasons change from the height of a hero's back. But as she grew, Daniel shrank. It was a slow, cruel arithmetic. For every inch Maya gained, Daniel's spine seemed to curve a little more toward the earth. The gray in his hair had turned to a stark, brittle white. His limp was no longer just a hitch in his step. It was a struggle against gravity itself. Maya began to see the things she had missed as a child. She saw the way his hand shook when he reached for his morning coffee. She saw the empty medicine bottles hidden at the bottom of the trash. She saw the winces he tried to mask with a quick smile whenever she entered the room. The heavy loads, the miles of red clay road, the rain, the heat. The bill was finally coming due. The crisis arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. The air was thick with the scent of coming rain. Daniel was in the yard. He was carrying 2 buckets of water from the well. It was a chore he refused to give up. He wanted to remain the provider, the man of the house. Maya was hanging laundry on the line. She heard it first, a sharp, sickening crack, like a dry branch snapping in the woods. Then, the heavy thud of the buckets hitting the dirt. Maya spun around. Daniel was on the ground. He wasn't moving. His face was pressed into the grass. The spilled water was soaking into his shirt. "Dad!" She ran. Her heart felt like it was hammering against her ribs. She reached him and rolled him over. His eyes were open, but they were clouded with a level of agony she had never seen. He was gasping. His teeth were clenched so tight his jaw looked like stone. I can't feel them, Maya," he wheezed. He was talking about his legs. In that moment, the world shifted. The invincible giant of her childhood was gone. In his place was a frail, vulnerable man. He looked so small against the backdrop of the vast Georgia sky. Maya didn't cry. She didn't have time. She dragged him toward the porch. She used every ounce of strength he had given her over the years. She got him inside. She called the emergency line. The recovery was slow. The doctors spoke in hushed tones about nerve damage and worn-out discs. They spoke about permanent limitations. The bills began to pile up on the kitchen table. They looked like white vultures. Daniel sat in his chair. He looked at the paper mountain. He looked at his useless legs. "I'm sorry, Maya," he whispered one night. "I was supposed to carry you, not the other way around." Maya knelt beside him. She took his rough, calloused hand in hers. "You've carried me long enough, Dad. It's my turn now." She didn't just speak the words. She lived them. Maya started waking up at 4 a.m. She walked the same red clay road her father had walked. But she wasn't being carried. She was throwing newspapers onto porches after school. She didn't go to practice or hang out with friends. She went to the big houses on the hill. She scrubbed floors. She cleaned windows. She folded linens until her fingers were raw. She bought his pills. She bought the groceries. She paid the electric bill. Then, the ghosts of the past returned. Robert, Daniel's brother, showed up at the door. He hadn't visited in a decade. He looked at the modest house. He looked at Daniel in his chair. He didn't look at Daniel with love. He looked at him with pity. "This is enough, Maya," Robert said. He stood in the kitchen, smelling of expensive cologne. "You're a bright girl. You have a future. You can't spend your life being a nurse to a man who can't even walk." Maya stopped washing the dishes. She turned around. Her eyes were like flint. "He's my father," she said. "He's a burden," Robert snapped. "He made his choice years ago. Now look at him. He's dragging you down with him. Come stay with us. We'll get you into a good college. Let the state handle his care. He'll be better off in a facility." Daniel looked down at his lap. He didn't defend himself. He believed his brother might be right. He didn't want to be a cage for his daughter. Maya stepped forward. She stood between her uncle and her father. "A burden," her voice was low. "Dangerous. When the world called me a mistake, he called me his daughter. When everyone in this town walked away, he walked for me. He broke his body so I wouldn't have to break my spirit." She pointed to the door. "He didn't leave me when I was a helpless child. I will never leave him now that he is a tired man. Get out of our house." Robert left. He didn't come back. The house was quiet again. Daniel reached out for her. Maya took his hand. "You should go to school, Maya," he said softly. "Don't stay for me. I am going to school, Dad, but I'm coming home every night." She did more than just go to school. She excelled. She studied by the light of a single lamp while Daniel slept. She memorized anatomy. She learned about the nervous system. She learned about the miracle of the human body. On graduation day, Maya stood at the podium. She was the valedictorian. The townspeople were there, the same ones who had whispered on the bus, the same ones who had watched a man limp by with a child on his back. They were silent now. Maya didn't talk about her grades. She didn't talk about her scholarships. She looked at the front row. Daniel was there. He was in a wheelchair. His suit was old, but his tie was straight. His head was held high. "People ask me how I got here," Maya said into the microphone. The room was so still you could hear the clock ticking on the wall. "They see my hard work, but they don't see the foundation. I didn't get here on my own feet." I got here on the back of a man who refused to let me fall. I got here because someone loved me more than his own comfort. She looked directly at Daniel. I am going to become a physical therapist. I am going to learn how to make broken things whole again. Because I want to give back just a fraction of the strength that was given to me. When she finished, the applause was like thunder. But Maya didn't care about the noise. She walked off the stage. She went straight to the man in the wheelchair. She leaned down and hugged him. "We did it, Dad," she whispered. Daniel squeezed her hand. For the first time in years, the pain in his face was gone. It was replaced by a glow that could have lit up the entire county. The road ahead was still long. The farmhouse was still old. The money was still tight. But as they left the school, Maya pushing the chair, Daniel holding her diploma. The roles had finally shifted. The bridge was still there. It was just being crossed from the other side. Maya looked at her father's hands. They were resting on his lap. She knew what she had to do. She would study. She would work. She would learn. She would become his legs, just as he had once been hers. Chapter 5. Reversing Roles. When Maya becomes the legs. The old farmhouse had always been a place of quiet strength. Now, it was a tomb of silence. Daniel sat by the window. His wheelchair was pulled close to the glass. He watched the seasons change from the same spot. The green of summer, the gold of autumn, the stark white of winter. His legs were useless. They felt like heavy, foreign objects. His once powerful frame was now thin, fragile. The man who had carried Maya across miles of unforgiving road could barely lift his own hand to scratch his chin. He was trapped, confined within the four walls of his home, and within the prison of his own despair. The spark in his eyes had dimmed. He rarely spoke. He just watched the world go by. A shadow of the man he once was. He was a retired firefighter, a rescuer, a father. Now, he felt like a burden, then. The front door opened. It wasn't a casual entrance. It was a declaration. Maya walked in. She wasn't the young student anymore. She was a woman. Her posture was confident. Her eyes held a calm determination. She had just finished her degree in physical therapy. She had spent years learning the intricate dance of bones and muscles. She looked at her father. Her heart ached. "Dad." Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of years of unspoken promise. Daniel turned his head slowly. A flicker of something. Recognition. Perhaps a hint of hope. "Maya," he whispered. His voice was raspy from disuse. She knelt beside his wheelchair. She took his hands. They were cold, brittle. "I'm home, Dad, and we have work to do." Daniel just looked away. "There's nothing left to do, Maya. I'm done. My body's done." "No." Maya's voice was firm. "You're not done. We are going to bring you back." She tried gentle exercises. She tried massages. She tried everything she had learned. Daniel participated, but his spirit was not there. The light in his eyes remained dim. She pushed his wheelchair out onto the porch. The uneven planks made the chair wobble. Daniel flinched with every bump. The process was slow, painful. "It's not working," Daniel said one afternoon. His voice was flat. "I can't feel anything. I just feel useless." Maya looked at the wheelchair. She looked at the vast, beautiful world outside the porch, the world her father longed to see. A different idea formed in her mind. It was crazy. It was unconventional. It was born of desperation and deep, unwavering love. She walked behind his chair. She bent down. She carefully lifted him from the seat. Daniel gasped. His body was stiff. He was light, so incredibly light. Maya held him close. Her arms were strong. They had trained for this. Not just in a gym, but through years of carrying her own burdens. She carried him out to the edge of the porch. She sat him gently on the top step. Daniel looked out at his garden, at the faded glory of his roses. He took a deep breath, a shaky, unbelieving breath. "Maya," he choked out. A tear tracked a path through the dust on his cheek. "What are you doing?" She looked into his eyes. Her voice was a soft whisper, a secret shared between two souls. "You carried me when the world rejected me, when I had no one. You carried me through the snow, through the rain. Now, I carry you." She shifted his weight slightly. Her arms didn't tremble. "I carry you so the world can see we are still here, Dad. So you can see we are still here." Daniel broke. He wept, not just from gratitude, but from the sharp, bitter sting of a pride that had been lost, a strength that had vanished. He was a man being held like a child. He felt the shame, the raw, unadulterated humiliation of it. But then, he felt something else. He felt the warmth of her arms. He felt the steady beat of her heart against his chest. He felt a love so profound, it bypassed all pride, all pain. It was pure, unconditional. He laid his head against her shoulder. He closed his eyes. This was not weakness. This was redemption. The next day, the ritual began. It was not a medical procedure. It was an act of faith. Every afternoon, after her studies, after her work around the farm, Maya would go to her father. She would lift him from his wheelchair. She would carry him in her arms. She carried him through the tall grass of the yard. She carried him to the old oak tree where he had held her in the blizzard so many years ago. She carried him to the fence line, where the dirt road met the highway. The same road he had once walked with her on his back. He felt the sun on his face. He felt the breeze on his skin. He heard the chirping of the cicadas. He smelled the rich, earthy scent of the Georgia soil. His senses, long dulled by confinement, began to awaken. The old neighbors, the ones who had once stared with judgment, now watched from their cars as they passed. They saw a tall, strong black woman carrying a frail, white man, her father. They saw the deep, unwavering love in her eyes. A silent, profound shift occurred in the town. They had seen Daniel carry Maya. They had dismissed it as a fool's errand, a desperate act. But seeing Maya carry Daniel, that was different. That was a mirror. It showed them their own callousness, their own indifference. The strength of Maya's arms was undeniable, but it was the strength of her spirit that truly left them speechless. One afternoon, an elderly woman, Mrs. Henderson, who had always been quick with a disapproving glance, stopped her car. She got out. She walked slowly toward the fence. Maya had just set Daniel down on a small bench she had built. His face was lit by the golden glow of the setting sun. "He looks peaceful," Mrs. Henderson said softly. Her voice was raspy. Maya smiled. "He is." Mrs. Henderson looked at Maya. Her eyes were filled with an emotion Maya couldn't quite decipher. It looked like regret. It looked like admiration. "He always was a good man, Daniel," Mrs. Henderson said. Her voice caught. "Stubborn, but good." Daniel opened his eyes. He saw Mrs. Henderson. He managed a weak smile. That smile. It wasn't the proud smile of a hero. It wasn't the pained smile of a sufferer. It was the genuine, pure smile of a man who was finally, truly, seeing the world again. Maya looked at her father. Then she looked at the woman who had once judged them. She understood. The weight she carried was not just her father's body. It was the weight of years of prejudice, of isolation, and with every step, with every tender touch, she was lifting that weight. She was healing not just her father, but the cracks in the hearts of those who watched. The sun set in a blaze of orange and purple. Maya held her father's hand. They sat in comfortable silence. He was frail, yes, but he was no longer a shadow. He was seen, he was cherished, and he was being carried back into the light. His daughter, his legs, his heart. Chapter 6. The Smile of Victory. The red clay road was no longer a path of isolation. It had become a stage for a miracle. Every afternoon, the neighbors stopped their cars. They didn't stare with cold eyes anymore. They watched with a silence that felt like a prayer. They saw Maya. Her back was straight. Her step was sure. She held Daniel in her arms as if he were the most precious cargo in the world. The old prejudices were melting, like the last traces of a harsh winter under a warm spring sun. People who had once crossed the street to avoid them now rolled down their windows. They offered a nod. A soft greeting, sometimes. A basket of peaches or a warm loaf of bread was left on the fence post. The town was changing, because they were watching a love that didn't care about the rules they had lived by for decades. It was more than just a daughter caring for her father. It was a light shining into the dark corners of the county. The invitation came in the mail. It was a formal letter from the town council. They were holding a meeting to honor the local heroes of the community. "I don't need a medal, Maya," Daniel whispered. He was sitting in his chair by the window. His voice was thin, but his spirit was bright. Maya knelt beside him. She straightened his collar. "It isn't about the medal, Dad. It's about letting them see, really see." The night of the meeting arrived. The town hall was packed. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and floor wax. People sat shoulder to shoulder in the rows of folding chairs. There was a hush as the side door opened. Maya didn't push a wheelchair. She didn't use a walker. She carried him. She walked through the center aisle. The sound of her boots on the wooden floor was steady. Thump, thump, thump. Daniel rested his head near her heart. He wore his best Sunday shirt. His hands were folded peacefully over his chest. He wasn't hiding his weakness anymore. He didn't have to. The audience held its breath. They saw the contrast. The strong, young black woman. The frail, elderly white man. But they didn't see a scandal. They saw a testament. Maya reached the front of the room. She placed Daniel into a chair of honor draped in velvet. The mayor stood up. He looked at the crowd. Then he looked at Maya and Daniel. "For too long, we looked at this family and saw a mistake," the mayor began. His voice trembled slightly. "We looked at the surface and missed the soul. Today, we don't just honor a retired firefighter. We honor a bond that has taught this town more about justice and love than any book ever could." The room erupted. It wasn't a polite clap. It was a roar. It was the sound of 1,000 hardened hearts finally breaking open. Daniel looked up. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked at Maya. He wore a radiant smile. It was a smile that had traveled through a blizzard, through years of pain, through the silence of his brother. It was a smile of pure, unfiltered victory. He was proud, not of what he had done, but of who she had become. The news of that night traveled. It skipped over fences. It crossed the county line. It reached the ears of those who had turned their backs. Slowly, the phone started to ring. Neighbors who hadn't spoken to Daniel in 20 years started showing up with tools to fix the barn. Women brought over quilts. The old hatred was being buried under a mountain of small, kind acts. but for Maya and Daniel. Life remained simple. The town's praise was nice, but it wasn't why they breathed. A few days later, the air was crisp. It felt exactly like that night so many years ago. "Take me to the tree, Maya," Daniel said. Maya nodded. She lifted him. She moved with a grace that made his weight feel like a blessing. They walked across the yard, past the garden where the roses were in full bloom. They reached the old oak tree, the giant that had stood guard over the property since before Daniel was born. Its branches were wide. Its roots were deep. This was where it had started. In the white blur of a storm. Maya sat on the bench under the tree. She kept Daniel in her lap for a moment. "We made it, Dad," she whispered. Daniel looked at the horizon. The sun was a giant orange coin dropping behind the pines. "We were never alone, Maya," he said, "even when the doors were closed. We had the walk. We had each other." Maya rested her chin on the top of his head. She thought about the little girl in the pink jacket. She thought about the man who broke his back so she could stand tall. She realized that the world had tried to tell them they didn't belong together. The world had tried to say they were a tragedy, but the world was wrong. They were a song. Maya leaned back against the rough bark of the oak. She held the man who had given her everything. The wind whispered through the leaves. It sounded like a sigh of relief. They sat there, in the gathering shadows, the child who was carried, and the man who did the carrying. Now, they were both home, and for the first time, the silence was perfect. Love is not just a feeling. It is a choice we make every day to carry one another through the storms of life. Daniel and Maya taught us that the heaviest burdens become light when they are held with a heart full of devotion. If their journey touched your soul, please join our small community by subscribing. We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you are ready for another story of the human spirit, simply click the video on your screen to keep the light burning with us.